Hey there, fellow hungry travelers. Mark here with Wolters World, and today we're here in Stockholm, Sweden. And today we're going to talk about are some of the European food etiquettes that American tourists should know before they come to Europe so they have a better time devouring all the food here, whether it's the meatballs here in Sweden or the pasta in Italy or, I don't know, the pub grub in the British Isles. Because I want to tell you one thing you need to know is when I see American tourists, one thing I see them get upset about is the idea of no free refills on soda. Yes, I'm sorry, my friends. Refills are not a thing here. Sometimes you might find it at a Burger King here or there or something like that, but in general in Europe, no free refills. So when you get your soft drink, whether it's with your kids or yourself, know that that's the one you're going to get. You have to pay for each one, which might explain why you don't find so much ice in the glasses and why Europeans don't like all that ice, because they know more ice equals less soda. And I want that full glass of soda. So that's why number one is the no free refills, because that's where I've seen the most upset little tourists out there from the US. Another thing I think is important for Americans to know is not everything that's on the table is for free. Hey, you go to the US, they put bread and butter on the table. It's free. They put chips and salsa on the table. You eat until you're about to explode and then your tacos come. Not everywhere in Europe is everything free. Now, some places bread and butter is free. Like here, I'm here in Stockholm where I just had lunch and they actually had a table. They're like, hey, there's a bread and butter table back there. If you want to get it yourself, it's totally fine. It comes with the meal. Oh, cool. But other places, like in Portugal, you got to pay for that cheese that's on there, that ham that's on there, okay? So just know, not everything could be free that you think might be free, so it's always good to ask. And when you sit down, another thing I think you need to realize is the etiquette with water. Now, tap water is going to be fine anywhere you go in Europe, and you can order tap water. It's not a problem. However, a lot of places will ask you, would you like still water or sparkling water? And you might think, oh, no, sparkling I have to pay for. Still water should be tap water. It should be free. No. They're going to want you to pay for that. You got to pay for that one. So if you want tap water, you've got to ask for tap water, okay? That will be free. And again, use my Sweden example. They actually had them on the side, like, oh, if you want water, just go over there and get it. Other places will bring it to you, but just have a heads up for it. Because if you start getting all those bottles of water, that 2 to 4 to 5 to 6 euros per bottle start to add up. Now, one of the things, there's a big difference in Europe versus the US is the tipping culture. Now, in the US, people tip 15, 20% on every, sit-down kind of meal, right? Well, here in Europe, there's a lot of places where you don't tip, or if you do, it's only a very little bit. Like here in Sweden, you don't tip. Finland, you don't tip. Germany, you might give them a few extra coins. Portugal, you might leave some, but you don't have to. But in general, tipping isn't really a thing. And if you're paying with credit card, they don't usually give you a spot to put the number in. So if you do want to leave a tip, because honestly, no one's going to stop you from leaving a tip if you want to, you need to tell them so when they put the number into the credit card machine, it goes into there. But I'll tell you, don't think that your credit card tip will actually go to your waiters here. So it's better to give them cash tips here in Europe versus the credit card thing. But in general, it's not a tipping culture thing here in Europe. Which leads into our next kind of thing, which is the customer isn't necessarily king when it comes to eating out in Europe. You want a special order, you want to change things up, they're more likely to say no here. However, I will give you this, if you do have allergies, they're awesome about that here in Europe, and that's a really great thing. But changing the menu items, usually, no, they're not going to do that. If you are upset about things, they aren't going to really care because service here, they make a good living wage. They make a good wage and they don't depend on your tips. So their service isn't quite up to what you're probably expecting. Now, certain places you do get better service. Like I find in Italy and Portugal, the people are very friendly. So that kind of comes across here in Scandinavia. The people are a little bit more distant, more reserved, and that kind of goes in their service. But just know, customer's not king, okay? Just have that in your mind. And one time, I've seen people get kind of upset with that. It's another thing you need to realize is, don't be surprised with how you order your pizza, because in the US, if you order a pepperoni pizza, it's a pizza that just has pepperoni on it. That's it. However, I remember when I lived in Finland and I ordered a pepperoni pizza and it came with peppers and tuna fish and slices of salami. And I'm like, what's going on? Just realize your pizza might have a name to it that has different ingredients. So read the ingredient list. And that goes for a lot of things that you think are traditional foods. Like I remember one time one of my friends, she got a tomato salad. Now, having lived in Europe and having lived in Portugal where this was, I knew that a tomato salad was literally just cut up tomatoes. She thought it was like a lettuce salad with some tomatoes and she had tears in her eyes. So just make sure you realize that the nomenclature is very important, that you read all the things there. Now, one of those things I love and hate about going out to eat in Europe is the idea that, well, eating out isn't a marathon, which is awesome. You're there to enjoy. You're there to eat. You're there to talk with your friends. It's much more of an experience than a rush to shovel down all the food and get the next table and get the tables turned over. So if you have a table, you have a reservation, no one's going to rush you. But that can be frustrating when you want to order, like, hey, could I order, or could I get the bill? Those kind of things, you need to realize that it takes a longer time. So if you're in a hurry, make sure you let them know, hey, I've got a theater performance I got to go to. We got to go catch a train in a little bit. So they kind of go a little bit faster, because that's where I see some people get upset, because I'll see them looking around. Where's that waiter? I want to get my bill. I want another beer. What's going on here? It's just, things are a little bit different. And I know it kind of goes on with that customer is not king, but I think the marathon versus the sprint when it comes to eating and the experience of eating is important to note the difference. And that's why when you go to a restaurant, you see that a table has a reserve sign on it and it's relatively early in the evening, you might want to ask them, hey, when is that reservation? Because a lot of times they only have one reservation for the day. They only have one happen in case people go too long. And they're like, oh, the reservation's at 9 o'clock. I'm like, well, it's 6 o'clock now. What if I promise to get my whole family, we'll eat and be out of here within an hour? And we'll be out of here by 7, so you have 2 hours like to make more money off that table, or do whatever, or leave it there. Okay, now make sure you're out in time. But that's one of the things I've actually done quite a few times. Like, hey, we're going to be eating quickly. I just want to feed the kids. We'll get out of here before the 8 o'clock sitting or the 9 o'clock sitting. So that's something you can use. That's like a little hack I do to sometimes get a seat at a restaurant, and knowing that I'm not going to have the 3-hour dinner, but only like the 35, 45 hour long dinner. So that could be something to think about. Because in the US, they're like, turn those tables as much as they can, like until you're there to get it, then they put the reserve sign down. Now, if you're traveling Europe with their kids, I think another important thing to mention in terms of the food etiquette and going out to eat is don't really expect a kids menu. Now, some places it's getting a bit better. Like if I'm in the UK, I'll see a kids menu here and there. Even in France, I see it pop a little bit. But a lot of places, there isn't a kid menu. Now, you can ask them to make a smaller portion of a meal that's on the menu for the kids. Now, there's no guarantee they'll give you a smaller price, but they'll give you a smaller portion size. That's one thing I think is important to realize, like the sharing aspect of things with your kids. Because, yeah, getting the dino nuggets, it's not going to pop up on the menu, okay? Maybe it does somewhere. I'm sure some of the comments are like, well, I had dino nuggets if he chins at this barbecue place. Yes, it can happen, but in general, it's a little bit tougher. And I think going along with that kind of serving size idea, I don't think you have to realize, in Europe, the serving sizes are much smaller. You might understand why they are a lot smaller than we Americans, because the serving size just aren't meant to feed an entire army for the week. They're meant for that one meal. Like, I'm here, I had my meatballs and mashed potatoes and lingonberries with cucumber stuff. It was a perfectly portioned meal that I'm like, oh wow, I feel I'm not full, but I'm like perfectly satisfied. Like, satisfied is the greatest way to talk about food when you're in Europe. You're so satisfied afterwards, but I don't feel like I'm going to explode and blow up. Like when you go out and eat in the US, it's like, my God, how do I take it all home? And that's one thing you need to realize is it's not as much of a like portion size that you're going to be sharing between two people. Some places it is, but not all the time. Okay, but it's more smaller sizes, also smaller drink sizes. Even if you go to fast food places, when you're thinking, I'm going to get a large Coke, the large Coke is probably the size of a medium Coke in the US. So be aware of that. And also one thing, this isn't in every place. Like here, you wouldn't see that in Sweden, but in some places in Europe, the idea of a shared table, I know living in Portugal, if anybody ordered anything, your friends would come and like try some of it. You know, like they wanted to try it. They wouldn't even ask. And that's where I saw some people like, what the hell? Like my students were like slapping people's hands down. I'm like, no, that's kind of normal sometimes here with friends and stuff. So be ready for possible sharing of food that you didn't realize was going to be there, which can be good because then you can try the other stuff. But don't go overboard because the portion sizes, like if you eat half their pizza, that's not cool. Okay, not cool. That's not cool anywhere. Now, another thing I think is important in terms of the etiquette is how you pay. Now, getting the bill's at the end, but you'll notice that getting the bill in different places, sometimes it's straightforward. Some places you pay beforehand. Some places, like, you just get the waiter's attention. Could I pay, please? Oh, sure. And then you'll pay and go. And it could be you either pay with cash or card. Visa, MasterCard are everywhere. Tap and go is really big. Some place, like here in Sweden, like there's places that don't even take cash. But there's other places I've been to, like in Germany, where they only took cash. So you got to be careful with that. Know what way you can pay. Because if you're coming with your Discover card and American Express, your eating options are very, very limited. And just in general with the bill, it can be a true cultural experience. Like in Greece, if you ask for the bill, they're like, oh, you don't want anything more? Do you want a coffee? You're like, no, I'm okay. I need to go. Can I get the bill? Sure. And then they show up with like a coffee anyway. And then they bring some yogurt and honey for you, or a little cake, or of course a shot of ouzo. And you're like, I wanted to leave like half an hour ago, and they keep bringing me stuff. Yeah, that's all free at the end. But then they're like, okay, now you can pay. But it is an experience when you're paying at different places, whether it's trying to get the waiter's attention to let them know that you're done, or waiting to make sure you have your coffee. I mean, it's a thing. And so don't get frustrated, because that's where I see tourists sometimes get mad, is they're like, I wanted to leave because I asked for my bill and it's time to go. Now I want my bill, and then we didn't leave for another 30 minutes. That's more of a thing here. It goes to that like marathon versus sprint when it comes to eating. Now, for my vegetarian and vegan friends, I'm going to tell you right now, you have way more options here in Europe. Whereas like in the US, I find sometimes there's like, oh, there's a vegetarian option on a menu, and maybe there's a vegan option, maybe, but usually you have to go to like a specialty restaurant for that. I find throughout Europe, vegetarian and vegan options show up a lot more often on normal menus, so that's kind of a nice thing. And also, you'll notice the food isn't as colorful here in Europe. Like you see your Fanta, and here it's like a dull orange, and you see it in the US, it's like glows in the dark. You're like, oh my gosh. And you'll notice the coloring here is much more like tempered down, right? Because they don't have all the like the GMO stuff and the extra additives and things. I mean, you can look online for all the stuff that you can't eat in Europe, but you can eat in the US. And so that's one of those things you got to think about. So you really do feel like your food's a little bit healthier when you're here. You don't have as much of that greasy grossness, right? Now, another small etiquette difference I want to talk about is actually how you hold your utensils and how you use your utensils. Now, if I have a pizza in the US, it's already cut for me and I'm eating the slices with my hand. If I got a burger, I'm eating it like this. Yes, people eat like that here too, but you'll notice sometimes people use a fork and knife with their hamburger, like in Scandinavia. I've seen it a lot of times. With pizza, you go to Italy, you're like, wait, they don't cut it in a slice like the triangle stuff? Well, you can get by the slice, but most of the time you're cutting with a fork and knife, you know, you have that. But also it's how you hold the fork and knife. In the US, you know, you poke it with your fork and then you cut it with your knife and then you put your knife down, then you switch hands, you take the fork, then you put it in your mouth. Nom. Europeans are much more efficient. Fork, cut, fork, now mouth. They don't put the knife down and switch hands. That's one of those things you'll see. So look for it next time you're here. Be like, oh, you're right. There's more shoveling here than switching. Interesting. And then I want to talk about this etiquette difference. And that's one of the things that I see a lot of people's heart, get broken when they come here. And that is your idea of traditional food from a country might be very different than the actual traditional food in the country you're going to. Because think about it. If you're in Wisconsin, you have all the Swedish immigrants that came here in the 1800s, right? Well, that's 200 years ago. No one's eating the Lutka fish here in Sweden anymore. I mean, some people, yeah, but like it's not a thing. Whereas there, it's like, oh, you have the smoked fish, you have to have that. That's a thing. Yeah, there's a thing for my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, you know, when the Bingstons came over. Yeah, that's totally different, right? And that's another thing is like your spaghetti and meatballs, which I talk about ad nauseum. I apologize, but it's such a great example. In the US, it's always spaghetti and meatballs. That's how we roll. Well, in Italy, spaghetti is a first plate and meatballs are a second plate. And so they come at different times. They're not mixed together. And for the people that are going to say, well, there are some places that do that. Yes, there's like some places that do it. But in general, you don't see it. It's not a thing there. And that's just it. You kind of get disappointed. Like, oh, it wasn't the smorgasbord like I remembered back at home. And it's not like the spaghetti that I remember my nonna made it back in the day. Look, it's just different kind of stuff. And don't be disappointed by it. Just know that it's different kind of things. My grandma, she made the best chicken and noodles. It was chicken, and she's like, and it's the Spätzle, the German noodles that my grandma, my Oma made for me that came over from the old country. I'm like, oh, it's so good. So I remember coming to Germany the first time. I'm like, oh, where's the Spätzle and the chicken? And they're like, Spätzle with chicken? What kind of sick, perverted person are you? Spätzle with cheese or Spätzle with bacon or something, but not Spätzle with chicken. What a weirdo. But the thing was, I was so used to that, I was like heartbroken. It actually took me a couple years to really get back into eating the German noodles Spätzle when I go to Germany because I was so disappointed by it. So just realize you're going to have some of these differences. And, you know, what are some of the things you've noticed over the years when you've traveled to Europe and comparing eating out in the US versus eating out in Europe? What are some of those etiquettes you want to kind of think about? Because another thing I think is an etiquette one is actually looking at your phone usage. Here in Europe, people don't stare at their phone while they eat. They're more interacting with people. Now, they'll look at their phone occasionally. I'm not saying they don't do it, but you'll see that people are more interacting while they're eating versus sitting on their phone, doom scrolling, or, you know, it's a family of four and everyone's on their phone. You don't have that as much here. So that's a nice little thing too. So what are those little food etiquette differences you've noticed over the years in your travels? Let us know in the comments below so people can have a better time enjoying the great food here in Europe or the US or anywhere around the world. I wish you all the best. I'll say bye from here in Stockholm, Sweden.